Thank you for that kind introduction, Professor Hedinger, and thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here at Worcester. Although I haven't spent much time on campus, I learned a long time ago that this is one of America's premier liberal arts colleges. In fact, one of my friends, Judge Solomon Oliver, who is in the Federal District Court in Cleveland, has always been effusive in his praise and admiration for this school. So you have a graduate there you should really be proud of, and I know he is proud of you. Actually, at Ohio State, we've also had many Worcester graduates there as well, and they've added immeasurably to the quality of the student body. Actually, what has impressed me most about the Worcester students has not only been their intelligence, but their keen sense of service and concern about the world around them. In fact, I understand that approximately 1/3 of you are engaged in some type of volunteer service projects covering the gamut from recycling to hunger programs to working on race relations. Of course, I also understand that concern doesn't pervade everything you do. Being the parent of an Oberlin student, I know that the football team has not treated the Oberlin team very well in the last few years. I understand that many of you have been assigned my book to read, and I'm truly pleased about that. But I've been on college campuses long enough to know that probably maybe half of you have read the book and the rest are waiting on the cliff notes. Seriously, I am truly pleased to be part of the 1996 Worcester Forum and able to share some of my thoughts with you. I am also especially pleased to be at a school that from its very beginnings has been committed to equality. Your first president, Willis Lord, said the sameness of our origin as men and women carried with it our original and essential equality. So Worcester deserves great credit for promoting equality of opportunity from its earliest days. Equal opportunity as part of your history and part of your legacy, and you should be proud of it. Years ago, when I was a youngster growing up in the black housing projects in Indiana, I never dreamed that I would be on the college speaking circuit, much less talking about my experiences trying to survive in the racially divided world of my youth. Now it seems like I'm a historian, talking about people and places and events that seem so distant and so far away. Actually, I wish I was a historian, simply chronicling past events in times of bygone eras. But the more I reflect, the more I realize that America of today is very similar to the America of my youth in the 1950s and the 1960s. In the America of my youth, housing, jobs, and public attitudes were all delineated along rigid racial lines. And although there have been changes, the racial lines remain. The racial divide persists in housing, jobs, and public attitudes. Most of you were born in the last 2 decades, and you may not be personally familiar with the legacy of America's past, but you need to understand it, because soon you will be beyond this place. You will be the lawyers, the judges, the doctors, the teachers, the community leaders of the future in Ohio and around this country. And you know that each of us has to decide what we will do in life. Will we help make this world a better, more humane place, or will we do nothing? And I thought what I might do tonight is to share some of my past with you, some of my history, so that you might better understand that time and how it has shaped the present, and maybe it will help you decide what your role is for the future, whether you will be an active or passive participant, whether you will be a person who seeks to bring society together or one who focuses on your own personal needs and desires. I want to tell you my story of poverty, of racism, of family alcoholism, and of the daily struggle to survive. A struggle to survive in a world I did not create, in a world I could not change, and in a world that saw me as a threat. And I tell you this story, not because I am important, but because there are, even today, many other stories out there like mine. And we must never forget, as we sit here on this college campus, that we are fortunate, in some cases just plain lucky, to be here, to be able to casually pursue our educational goals. No doubt in the surrounding community of Worcester and north central Ohio, we could find many people who have not had, nor will they ever have, the opportunity that you have available to you, the opportunity to shape your own future and to not have it shaped by others. More than once I have thought that but for a tiny twist of fate, a misstep here, a wrong step there, I might have had a very different life or no life of it all. I lost many of my boyhood friends from the projects playgrounds of my youth to drugs, to alcohol, to violence, and to just plain poverty and indifference. And while I thank God for my fortune, I ache for those who hoped for a better life, but were unable to find it. The urgency of the situation today was brought home to me recently as I followed talk about welfare reform and President Clinton's plan to end welfare as we know it. And while I understand the American reluctance to help those who can help themselves, I think we need to know who will bear the brunt of these changes. Unfortunately, it is no secret that those who will bear the brunt, those who will shoulder the burden of welfare reform, are children. Census figures released last August show that 48% of the chronically poor in this country are children. 39 million Americans lived in poverty in 1993, which was 6 million more than in 1990. The most shocking figure of all is that 15 of the 39 million Americans in poverty are children. 1 of 5 children born in America are born into poverty. 1 in 3 Latino children are born into poverty. And almost 1 of every 2 African American children born in this country are born into poverty. But this poverty transcends races. In real numbers, the majority of poor are white. A new Urban Institute study estimates that the welfare reform bill, when effective the first of this month, could push an additional 1.1 million American children into poverty. The public boasting and the swirl of articles accompanying welfare reform legislation sent my mind back to the work that I've been doing for the past 10 years, speaking and writing about my experiences as a boy coming of age in the 50s and the 60s. I lived at the crossroads of America. I lived at the crossroads geographically, culturally, economically, and racially. Until age 9, I lived a comfortable life as the son of a wealthy, white Virginia restaurant owner. I attended whites-only schools, whites-only skating rinks, and whites-only theaters. At age 9, my life was truly privileged. I bought whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted it. And I took that all for granted as part of my birthright. I saw no barriers to my life or to my future. And I felt that I could do or be anything that I wanted to be. Though I grew up in the rigidly segregated South, my family lived near black neighborhoods. And I saw the black schools, I saw the black movie theaters, and I saw the black swimming pools. And they were very different than what I had access to. But I never considered the injustice of the situation until my own world began to unravel at the age of 10. My father's drinking exploded into full-blown alcoholism, and my mother fled in the middle of the night from his beatings, taking a younger brother and a sister and leaving me and my brother Mike with my father. I learned to cope with living with an alcoholic. I saw the peaks and valleys of emotion, the contrasting loving and hostile attitudes, and I daily lived the constant turmoil that is part of an alcoholic's family. And maybe some of you sitting in the audience tonight have had that experience as well. Up to the time my mother left, we lived a life of total economic security. My father's success was enormous. He had a restaurant, a beer tavern, even a septic tank truck, which ironically he won in a crap game. All the trappings of success. In Virginia, he was the man with the Midas touch. Everything turned to gold. In 1951, he made $50,000. And you don't need to be an economist to know that was real money in those days. 6 months after my mother left, he lost it all. The restaurant, the tavern, the Alexandria townhouse, even the septic tank truck. And we ended up ducking and dodging bill collectors and hiding the car from the repo man. Although the loss of my mother and the economic fall was hard and unremitting, the greatest change in my life occurred in January of 1954, 42 years ago. And that change occurred as my brother and I sat huddled together at the rear of a Greyhound bus racing from Washington, D.C. to Muncie, Indiana. And my brother Mike and I thought we were off to visit my mother's parents, who lived in Muncie and with whom we had spent every summer, every Christmas, every holiday that we could. And we thought that we were about to escape the poverty and the anguish of Virginia and the hard economic slide downward. As that bus sped across frigid Ohio in the middle of winter, my mind was on Muncie because I knew without a doubt that it was the place where I was going to be saved from the savage poverty of Virginia, from having the only meal that I was able to eat in a day being a 25-cent school lunch, if, and I say if, my dad could beg from passing strangers 2 quarters for my brother and me as we made our way to school in the mornings. So as we headed to Muncie, all my thoughts were ahead of me, not behind. Muncie would be my salvation. And I was certain that my mother's parents would take care of me, even if she was no longer part of our lives. But it was just outside of Dayton that my father leaned across the aisle. "Remember Miss Sally?" he asked, and I did remember her. She was a tall, thin black woman who had floated in and out of our lives, a cook, a maid, not a person of consequence. And he leaned even closer, and in a whisper, lest to be overheard by the white passengers on the bus, said, "She's my mama, and she's your grandmother." I was in an absolute state of shock. The black woman that I thought was our cook was my grandmother, and I never knew it. I resisted, I protested, I refused to believe him. But for the first time, I looked closely at my father. He had bronze skin and wavy hair, but Mom had said he was an Italian or Greek. It was all kind of fuzzy. Then memories started to filter back to me, and I began to recall talk about his passing as a Greek boy called Jimmy Wilmatis during the days he spent on the Atlantic City boardwalk in the 1930s. Then in Virginia, he had become Tony Williams, an Italian paisano. It was all kind of interesting. But the bus ride to Indiana, the bus ride that changed my life forever, was in January of 1954, well before the famous Supreme Court decision of Brown versus the Board of Education outlawing segregation in America. And I did not want to hear anything about being black, because I knew, even at the age of 10, how the rewards and the benefits of America are structured. Life is better if you are white. But try as I might, I was unable to resist the truth of my life and of my heritage. According to the social norms and the laws of America, I was black. And I remember my father's words that afternoon in January of 1954, once he revealed our heritage. He said, "Life is going to be different from now on. In Virginia, you were white boys. In Indiana, you're going to be colored boys. But I want you to remember that you aren't any different today than you were yesterday. But people in Indiana will treat you differently." And my brother Mike and I arrived in Muncie that afternoon, uncertain about our future. Once we stepped off the bus, we saw a Muncie that we had never seen before. Instead of traveling to the new suburban housing development of our white grandparents, we trudged, forlorn and totally confused, down Muncie's racial dividing line, Madison Street. On the west side lived poor whites, on the east poor blacks. Even the projects were segregated in those days. As we made our way deep into Muncie's black ghetto, I hoped that the change of address from Pitt Street in exclusive Old Town Alexander, Virginia, to my black grandmother's two-room shack at 601.5 Railroad Street in Muncie, Indiana, would not change my life. I not only hoped it would not change my life, I prayed that it would not change my life. But my father's words, "People are going to treat you differently," were, I hesitate to say, prophetic. I had not changed, but everyone thought that I had. Once my ancestry was discovered, that my father was black, that my grandmother was black, America's one drop, law and custom prevailed. I was treated differently. At first, I resented it. I thought I had as much right to be white as my classmates. Hell, I had been white in a segregated society. But try as I might to be white, Muncie was a divided place, and there was always someone willing to police those boundaries and to reward merit only if the achiever was white. In the midst of all this hostility and rejection, my brother Mike and I tried to reach out to our white relatives in Muncie for a lifeline, for hope. And we pleaded with my mother's mother, my white grandmother, to take a message of our suffering to our mother, only to be rebuffed by her curt response that she didn't carry messages for niggers. For most of us, there is someone who reached out to us, and in some cases, that person saved our lives. And my brother and I had our Savior in the form of someone who understood injustice but lived commitment. She was a 52-year-old black woman from Grady, Arkansas, with an 8th grade education, Dora Weekly Terry. And she came into our lives as we struggled to connect with Miss Sally. There had been no joyous reunion with Grandma Sally when we stood penniless and broken at the door of her tar paper shack at 601.5 Railroad Street. She was angry. She had been denied by her son, by her daughter-in-law, and my brother and I were found guilty by her of being co-conspirators. And we were the ones offered up to pay the debt of humiliation and desertion that she had suffered from my family. But it was in Grandma Sally's hostile, angry, tension-filled shack that Miss Dora appeared like an angel to two affection-starved boys seeking a kind and sympathetic word or just a friendly face. At first, I didn't pay much attention to her, deep in the depths of my own misery, but her daily visits soon made her the bright spot of our day. And every evening, between 6:30 and 7 p.m., we sat beside Grandma Sally's pot-bellied stove, stomachs rumbling from a sparse meal, and we raised our heads hopefully as we heard the smack of the gate against the fence post. And Miss Dora's serene smile filled the doorway, and her shadow cast a calmness over my grandmother's shack. But most of my attention was riveted on her tattered shopping bag. In fact, it was one of the few times in those days that I dared let a smile fill my face. And I relished the evenings when a small piece of homemade cake or pie baked earlier in the day for the white family for whom she worked was lifted gingerly from deep inside the bag. But the treats were more than supplements to meager meals. They were small acts of kindness that showed someone still cared about us. And later she recounted to me that she could hardly hold back her tears when she walked into that shack and saw my brother and me cowering in the corner of the small room, absolutely bewildered by the poverty and by the anger that we faced from whites and blacks alike. Today, when I think about her, tears come to my eyes. She was a 52-year-old widow, not related to us, working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day for $25. She had virtually nothing, but she was willing to share all that she had with us. And with no thought of reward or recognition, she took us into her home and made us her family. There were not any legal formalities, adoption, custody, guardianship. Those words were foreign to her, although they are part of my profession as a lawyer. All she saw were 2 little boys in need. And she took my brother and me by the hand and gave us a home, gave us love, and gave us affection. Often I am asked how a mixed-race boy growing up in abject poverty, shunned by both blacks and whites, could earn 5 college degrees and end up as dean of a major law school. And there's only one answer to that question, and that's Miss Dora. While I learned many great things pursuing my education and during 25 years of teaching, my most important lessons in life were learned from her. The one character trait that has carried me farthest is commitment, and I learned commitment from watching her walk to her job as domestic 6 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And she made that trek in winter and in summer, in good weather and in bad, whether she was sick or not, because she knew 2 little boys absolutely depended upon her. And though she owed us nothing, she willingly accepted the responsibility of being our mother. Often I waited for her on the so-called colored side of the railroad tracks, and never will I forget her figure in the distance, just turning the corner, beginning the slow walk home, her dress softly flowing in the breeze, her shoulders sloped, heavy from her day's toil. Often it looked like she could barely make it. Finally, she reached Muncie's racial dividing line and handed me the tattered shopping bag. I never once heard her complain about the meager salary she earned, nor the hours that she labored to get it. She was a marked contrast to my father, who always exhorted me in his bombastic, alcohol-laced oratorical tones. Never sell yourself cheaply, son. Your labor is all you have to give. And while I marveled at his oratory, he never had much staying power, especially at the menial, mundane jobs that were standard for Muncie's blacks. But Miss Dora knew that the coins tossed her way were what made the difference between starvation and survival for my brother and me. In the vernacular of our times, my dad talked the talk, but Miss Dora was the one that walked the walk, and that made all the difference. Miss Dora tried to do all she could, but the futility of our existence made Muncie a hard place to have dreams. It is the futility of those times I think about when I think about welfare reform and other issues. Miss Dora turned to the public assistance to help us, but that office said no. They said we had a father that could work, and even if he was a drunk and not working, it was not their fault. So my brother and I begged for food from family and friends. This lesson from the past hit me again last week when Tufts University's Center on Hunger and Poverty released its findings that child poverty is greater in the United States than in other leading industrial countries in the world, that the United States does less to protect its youngsters from hunger than do those other countries. The Tufts Center found 12 million children go hungry or are threatened with hunger in the country. So you can imagine my concern after last Wednesday night's debate when Vice President Gore was asked what President Clinton would do in the next administration to soften the landing when people are taken off welfare. But Vice President Gore made it clear that basic changes instituted in the system will remain, and the only change will be in the food stamp program and the treatment of legal immigrants. And I know President Clinton is as concerned about children as I am. I just hope he recognizes that there is no soft landing when you have little or nothing to eat. The type of hunger we have in the United States can produce, according to the Tufts Institute, long-term and even permanent cognitive impairments in children. And I sincerely hope that America's children of today do not have to go it alone, find food on their own without help, the way that my brother and I did. If it hadn't been for Miss Dora, we simply would not have survived. Though she made little money, her compassion and generosity were unmatched by all my hometown politicians railing against handouts to the poor. And others who frowned at my dad, brother, and me as we picked discarded fruit from the trash behind the fruit market and gambled we weren't getting spoiled meat when we searched the dumpster and the meat thrown out by the butcher. I wish those experiences on no other child. Last Wednesday, the issue of affirmative action was raised, and Senator Dole made it clear he supported the California initiative to end affirmative action, while President Clinton opposed it. Supporters of the California initiative talk about how they want to ensure true equality with that measure. In fact, one of the drafters of that California initiative, about my age, is from Indiana. And when questioned about what he was trying to accomplish with that initiative, said that what he wanted to do was to return to the life of the time of his youth in Indiana in the 50s, when, quote, everybody was the same. Well, hell, I was in Indiana in the 50s, and everybody was not the same. There was no equality of opportunity if you were black, minority, woman, or different in any other way. Doors were closed. Opportunities were not available. The so-called level playing field was more like a hill, with blacks and minorities at the bottom, dodging rocks, holes, and boulders on the way up. And as expected, many of us did not make it. Many of my friends from Muncie could not deal with the poverty and the racism and the adversity they experienced. Unfortunately, my father, while he had hope for me, lacked traits to stand up to the adversity that he encountered, and he succumbed to a life of alcohol. My grandmother Sally directed her anger at my brother and me for the injustice that she felt she had suffered from my family, and she showed her two grandchildren little love because of the cloud of anger which consumed her. Also, in the face of adversity, my mother's mother, my white grandmother, would not cross Muncie's racial barrier to comfort her own grandchildren. She could not conquer her racism and her prejudice, not even to reach out to her own flesh and blood. My black grandmother and my white grandmother lived within 2 miles of one another, yet though they both lived to advanced age, they never, ever spoke to one another. It was Miss Dora who stared adversity in the face and did not shrink from it. She did not become angry and bitter. God gave her a large heart. Her goal was simple: to make life a little easier for the two boys that trudged along behind her. We all face adversity to some degree, and I understand that this fall has been a difficult time for you here at Worcester as you struggle with the loss of 3 of your classmates. And I know there is great pain. But I learned it is how we choose to face adversity in our lives that shapes who we are. I have seen family and friends become bitter, angry, and broken. I have seen fortunes won and lost, and I have felt the pain of separation and alienation. And I saw one humble woman rise to the challenge. When Miss Dora endured the scorn of her friends and relatives and took in 2 black boys who appeared to be white, she did not say that people are happiest with their own kind. She did not say that she lacked time or money. She just did it. And while I take great pride that the book I wrote about the people who meant so much to me in my formative years has become a national bestseller and may be made into a movie, I still feel great pain for the thousands of children who are mired in poverty in this country, who still face great adversity in their lives. There are girls and boys out there now who dream to be lawyers like I did, or teachers, or just to get any job. Through no choice of theirs, their family disintegrates, and they have not chosen whether people around them will discriminate against them or take advantage of them. They did not create their poverty. As one former United States Senator said, we seem to have a feeling in America that if you're poor, you ought to be punished. And he continued, well, I've been poor, and being poor is punishment enough. It is hard to dream when you are closed out. It is hard not to become bitter and alienated. As a nation, we cannot have segments of society closed out of the system. Work through the system, we say, but the fraud of that statement leaves a bitter taste when it is clear that you are on your own. No one to guide you over or around the obstacles erected to close the doors. I wish I could say that the poverty, the discrimination, the violence, and the frustration that I faced as a child is nothing more than a historical footnote, and that all I'm doing is telling an interesting story. But it pains me to see that there are Muncies still all over this land. And as we sit here tonight on this beautiful college campus in Worcester, the harsh reality is that while life has changed for some persons of color, for the vast majority, not only has there been no change, it is worse. There are many more stories out there like mine, stories of poverty, of alcoholism, of struggles to survive. Today, it's crack, drugs, and alcohol that cripple our people. Children still have to go to bed hungry and scared of the violence all around them. In the years since my time in Muncie, I've had more professional success than I ever envisioned for myself, even in my wildest fantasies during my nights at 601½ Railroad Street. But the lessons of segregation are burned deep within me. There is nothing natural about segregation. It causes pain and it breeds hatred. Segregation is hard to change. It is entrenched. Children begin playing with neighbors, and neighborhoods often are segregated. In fact, entire school systems are sometimes not diverse. People spend time in temples and churches and mosques, but they are rarely diverse. Congregations often are segregated by race. But college campuses are different. Your classes, your housing, those arrangements are diverse. And you, personally, individually, alone, can shape the interactions here. Here at Worcester, you can end segregation. If everyone in this room reaches out to people of different backgrounds, of different races, of different ethnicity, you can change things. Since I have written my book, I've received countless letters from all over the world. But some of the sad letters I receive are from those that I knew in the divided community of my youth. I have received letters and calls from some of the black boys who daily fought with my brother and me on the sand and gravel playground of the projects. They are letters of endorsement that I have told the Muncie story, but they are also letters of apology and reconciliation. One former black playmate called and openly admitted he had made my life miserable because he thought I was receiving some benefit that he did not receive in Muncie. Now he realizes there was no benefit from looking white in Muncie. I did not get any special treatment. Like in making pottery, if you didn't fit the Muncie mold precisely, you were discarded along with the rest of the imperfect pots. I received some of the same kind of letters from white classmates. Older women recall their teenage years with shame when they admit that they were in boyfriends' cars late evenings that sped through the housing projects, slowing only enough to hurl racial epithets at us as we played basketball in the shadow of the streetlights. But the saddest letters I receive are letters of lost opportunity from white classmates. Some of them became lawyers, professors, university administrators, and writers like me. And those were not new dreams. Those were goals that we shared, but did not know that we shared. My friendship with white students was limited to the few brief moments we spent together on the athletic fields and the rare occasion that we spoke to one another in class. I especially remember one classmate, a basketball teammate. We battled both for a starting spot on the team and for the highest grade point average. And we were friendly. We chatted about future plans. He wanted to be a professor, and I wanted to be a lawyer. We had a great deal in common, but we did not become friends. We were prisoners of our times. He never invited me to his home, nor did I invite him to mine. Neither one of us had the intestinal fortitude to reach across the broad chasm between races in Muncie and forge a friendship. Based on the many traits that we shared, a love of school, a desire to be the best students we could be, we should have been friends. Now as I approach midlife, I have a great sense of loss from failing to take advantage of that opportunity to get to know my schoolmate. And while we were prisoners of those times and of that era, I still feel the loss. We both became teachers, we both became professors, and we both have spent most of our lives in university communities. I will never recover from that loss. And I know that many of you out here tonight are on the same course. You will get less out of this experience than you can. Colleges and universities are special places. You have drawn together here some of the greatest minds in the world, and you have an opportunity to learn about vast new areas of knowledge, to explore fields that many before you have not known. But I know that to reach out, even on a college campus, requires commitment on your part. You have to care about the racial divide. Like Miss Dora, you have to be able to see that something is wrong and make it your commitment to change it. I started tonight by saying that each of us has to decide what we will do to help make this world a better place, or will we decide to do nothing? Of course, my story makes it clear that a commitment is more than a simple decision one day. You must do more than talk the talk. To walk the walk, you have to reject 1,000 excuses and rationalizations for not reaching out. Excuse number one, segregation is natural. My whole life tells me that that is not the case. Excuse number two, segregation does no harm. I remember a relative of Miss Dora saying to her, "Why are you taking care of those white boys? They have white relatives that can take care of them." How lucky I was that Miss Dora did not buy that excuse. Excuse number three, I get tired of being the one who always has to reach out. They are the ones who discriminated. And I say to that, we have placed too much blame and not enough responsibility for change. Excuse number four, it's only a drop in the bucket. I'm just one person. How can I make a difference? Thank God Miss Dora didn't feel that way. And the excuses go on and on. The excuses test our commitment to reach out. My days in Muncie were before most of you were born. You are not responsible for what happened then, but you are responsible for what you do now. When you become the lawyers, the judges, the teachers, the doctors, when you become entangled in a neighborhood or place of worship in a piece of segregated America, when that happens, you join a piece of the racial divide. You will be added to one piece of segregated America. But if you reach out now, while you are here, you will be the richer for it, and so will we all. Your lifelong friends will take you across the racial divide, and you will be a bridge. That is why I told you about Miss Dora. People who care, who have commitment, who reach out, are the richer for it, and make all the difference. And you can be one of those people, and I urge you to take that step. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I understand we have a couple of mics, and so we have one person already at the mic.
Mr. Burns, I just think it's really neat.
Can you speak up a little bit? I can't hear you.
I just want to say I think it's really neat that you're here and able to talk with us. In your book, you said near the end, I realize now that I am bound to live out my life in the middle of our society and hope that I can be a bridge between races, shouldering the heavy burden that almost destroyed my youth. My question is, how do you see yourself as a bridge between races right now? What do you do for that?
Well, that's a legitimate question. I think what I've tried to do my entire professional life is be in a situation where I can, one, open doors of opportunity for people who would not have those doors open for them. And I think, you know, if you look at my record, I've had some success in doing that. But also be a person who can try to explain different lives to folks. And so I've spent most of my life trying to be an individual who tries not to be judgmental when I'm talking about or talking with persons who clearly do want to learn something about, say, life in another part of our society. So I can't say that I've been perfect, but I've tried to select my the jobs and the things that I've done to enable me to be in that kind of position.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
Yes, I know your brother hasn't had the same kind of success in life that you have. Where is he now?
My brother, Mike, who came with me and my dad when we went back to Indiana, has had a very difficult life. He presently is living in Indiana. He was shot and blinded about 20 years ago in a bar in Indianapolis. It was a black bar in Indianapolis. Actually, interesting thing about it is he was shot because a guy thought he was white. So he's been blind for over 20 years now, and his life has been a very difficult time. So while I take great pride in the things that I've been able to achieve and accomplish, basically he was destroyed by the time we spent in Muncie. And that is a painful thing for me to think about in terms of what happened in his life. Yes?
I know that you lived with your grandma who was black, and I know that you were in a black neighborhood, but it's hard for me to understand how you were both ostracized by both the whites and the blacks in Muncie, because it seems to me that because you almost look white that...
Almost?
Or you do look...
I thought I looked white, right?
It's hard for me to understand, because you do look white, that why you wouldn't get the privileges, because I didn't my parents lived in the 50s and the 60s, but I have no, correlation or experience with that.
Well, you're a reasonably well-educated 20-year-old, I assume. Can you imagine what it must have been like for a 9-year-old to walk into a room and someone say to him, well, you're not what you thought you were. No, you are different. You thought you were white, and you thought that these privileged opportunities were available to you, but they are not. You're asking me to make sense of something that didn't make sense to me at 9. But I think, again, it's a situation, that it was just kind of the time that we lived in then. It didn't make any difference what I looked like. I don't look any different today than I did then. Well, I don't have quite as much hair today as I did then. But it was a society. It didn't make any difference what you looked like. If you had some black heritage, you were considered to be black. And there was just no way that there was going to make any difference at all. That's how you were classified. And so that was the society that I grew up in. We thought when we went back to Indiana that maybe we might be accepted in the white society. In fact, when my dad enrolled us at school there in the 4th grade, he put a W in the form for race on our school records for white. But apparently there was such interest in the school to making sure that they got this right once they discovered who I was. They scratched out the W, put a C for colored on top of it, and then, lest someone still be confused, put a note on the back, said, father is colored, mother is white, boys appear to be white, but are not. And they live with Dora Terry, who they claim is no relation to them.
Okay,
you get the picture? They were pretty emphatic about that. Yes?
Do you believe you would be where you are today without your experience in Muncie?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of hard to say. Those were very difficult times. Those are very hard. I just barely got through it. There's a lot of people that didn't. My brother didn't get through it. I would not give anything in the world for those experiences, because I think those experiences made me the man that I am today, and I'm very comfortable with the man that I am today. But I do have a lot of pain with the people that were lost along the way.
Thank you.
Yes?
As it was said earlier, you, in the end of your book, you said that you wanted to be a bridge between races. Do you consider yourself now to be a member of one race or another?
When we went back to Indiana in 1954, it was made clear to us that we were simply not going to be part of that white community. For instance, I would be sitting in classes with white relatives who would refuse to acknowledge me, would refuse to recognize that I was related to them, where black cousins would. So from age 9 on, my self-identification has been as black, and that creates a lot of problems for people. Sometimes they look at me and they just can't come to grips with it. But that's been my personal identification, my background, my experience, my culture. I think my situation, or the situation for my children, is a little different, because the white side of their family and the white community did not reject them. Their experience was not similar to mine, and so they feel more comfortable in kind of a biracial category. So I guess maybe what you might see is kind of a generational difference here. My self-identification is different than my children. Yes?
I'm interested in your experience and its implications for public policy. You talked a lot about how poverty is the plight of our youth, and more so than any of the government officials want to admit to. And I guess my question is well, for example, Bob Dole in his campaign speeches has been talking about cutting welfare, just as President Clinton wants to, and he's under the guise that the private sector of welfare, if you will, private food banks, private charities are going to pick up the slack for what doesn't come from the government. And I say it's a guise because it's not going to work. And anyone who works in welfare of any sort is going to tell you that. And I guess I want to know, like, as an attorney and as someone who's lived there and who has dedicated their lives to helping other people who come from there, what can we do? Because I'm a junior and I'm an urban studies major and I'm hopefully going to law school to be a public defender in the juvenile justice system to try to pull these kids out of this fatalism that they come from in these ghettos. And to be really honest with you, I don't come from a background where they can say, she's one of them, she's been there. I haven't. I've had a private school education from the time I was 12, and I've grown up in very white suburbia, so I don't know what I'm talking about. So I guess, give me some advice, give me some direction.
Sure.
What can I do?
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunities, and we're not talking about you just don't have to, say, have the same experience. I think we're talking about helping open doors of opportunity to help provide things for people who don't have them. For instance, if you come to Ohio State Law School, what we're doing this next year is that we're developing a children's rights clinic. And so we will be working to represent children in this state. And so that's one thing we do. One of the other things that we're doing at Ohio State right now is that we have a street law program. We have a number of programs where we're assisting legal services programs around the state. Because, as you know, there's been a cutback on legal services, which means basically people who don't have money to hire a lawyer will, in fact, not have lawyers. And that's going to have a tremendous impact on particularly the poor people in this country. One of the things we're trying to do is to figure out a way that we can assist legal service programs and other public service programs. So we have a broad array of things, and I'm sure as I read the information from Worcester, there seems to be a lot of opportunities up here, at least the programs that I saw listed, chances to get involved. So I would encourage you to do that. Yes?
As you said, many people were lost along the way that you grew up with. People today living in poverty, the children don't finish high school most of the time, let alone get a bachelor's or a PhD. Why did you succeed? Why do you feel you got this far?
Why did I succeed? Actually, I'm beginning a second book and trying to answer that question myself. I don't know. I think I did have a lot of people along the way who did believe in me. I mean, my feeling was that if Miss Dora could go and do that job every day and to have the commitment that she had to provide support for my brother and me, that I could do my job. And my job was trying to be the best student that I could and to have very high goals and to try to achieve those goals. And there were a number of folks that I did grow up with who were successful, but a lot of them simply did not have kind of the family support in the sense, and I'm not talking about in the traditional sense, because I would see people on the street who would say, well, Greg, did you get your studies done, or this type of thing, who were very interested in me and my advancement. So I think, again, it was support that I had from people who wanted me to do all that I could do, that really I was able to internalize, that gave me a lot of inspiration, because I thought folks were making a lot of sacrifices for me, and that I had to try to continue to do the best that I could. Yes?
I noticed that in your book, when you first found out that about your heritage, that you kind of didn't believe that you were colored. And then, you know, as you got into junior high and high school and everything, you almost totally related to being colored. And your father, in the book, was complaining that, you know, he wanted you to be white. And I was wondering, why did you choose to take your heritage as being colored and make that what you were, when it could have been easier had you tried in certain situations to pass for white?
Well, that's a very good question, and you're absolutely right. Many times it would have been easier just to be white, because obviously if I, before I wrote my book, I'd have to explain when I go to a place who I was. That's one advantage of having a book out. But the thing was that I guess it was kind of the community that I grew up in, that I was such a part of that community, that I felt that if I denied people like Miss Dora and others who really were with me, that I was betraying them. And I simply could not do that. And even though it would have been easier, I wouldn't have to answer all the questions, well, you really don't look black, who are you? And of course, what we're dealing with is kind of society has changed a bit now. For instance, when I was young or younger, growing up, if you said anything about being black, you were immediately ostracized. And so, but that was a step that I was willing to take. Today, people may think that's not such a big deal, but it is still a situation, and it does make a difference. But I felt that I really didn't have any choice because of my history, because of my background, because the people who cared about me. There was only one direction that I could go in, and that's the direction that I chose. Yes?
You mentioned in your book often your father's sort of encouragement for your dreams, talking about you often as his white child or the child that wanted to be a lawyer. How important do you think that was in influencing your success? Do you think you would have gotten where you are today had he not done that?
I think his encouragement of me was absolutely critical because in spite of all of his shortcomings, he was an alcoholic, he had all kinds of problems, but there was one thing that was constant in his life, and that is he believed in me. You know, he believed that I could overcome the poverty and I could overcome the racism of Muncie and that I could achieve those dreams. And so when I had white teachers that told me that I could not do things that I wanted to do and could not be a lawyer or could not achieve certain goals, I always had him. But it was not only him. There was other people in the community as well who believed in me, who kind of gave me the word on a day-to-day basis, despite the type of negative messages that I was receiving from school, who really had confidence in me, and I think that made a difference. Unfortunately, my father, while he was supportive of me, sent different kind of messages to my brother. And you know, if you've read the book, that that he was very demeaning to him, indicated to him that he simply was not going to achieve his goals in life. And so to a certain extent, you may say that we both had kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yes?
I was wondering if you reconciled with the lost members of your family, your white grandmother, your black grandmother, your mother, and how that affected you and your children.
Well, I wouldn't say there's been a reconciliation. That side of the family, the white side of the family, is very upset about the book. They feel that I'm out to get them. They take it personally. And what I tried to tell them, that I was not trying to attack anyone. What I was trying to do was to tell the story of two little boys that were thrust into a world over which they had absolutely no control and tried to survive. So if they think the story is about them and about, you know, how they are portrayed, they are just way off base. Unfortunately, while I have had some reconciliation with some parts of my family who they feel that the book has answered a lot of questions that members of the family simply did not answer or did not want to talk about, there have been others who really resist and feel that the book is simply an attack on them. Yes?
Do you still have hostility towards your mother for leaving you in a situation like that?
Do I still have what?
Hostility?
Hostility. No, I have no hostility towards her. I understand why she left. She was an abused spouse. She had every right and every reason to leave. What was hard for me to understand was why when she left at 9, the next time I saw her, I was 21. And in 12 years, there was not one card, letter, or telephone call. Now that's hard to understand. Yes?
That was going to be kind of my question. Why would your mother just take your brother and your sister and not you and your brother?
Well, I guess I'm not the right one to answer that question, am I?
And also, do you know how your other siblings identify themselves as?
Well, they grew up in a white community, and so they identify themselves as white, and I've had some contact with them over the years, but this Muncie history has always been kind of something that they didn't, well, my mother didn't want to share with them, they didn't want to know. The book, however, has put it out there, and so while I have had some contact with them, I wouldn't say it's extremely comfortable relationship because we grew up in different worlds. They grew up in a white middle-class world, and I grew up in the black housing projects in Muncie, Indiana. And our experiences were just different. Yes?
I was wondering if you could tell me where you consider your hometown with all the differences and changes that you went through.
Where do I consider my hometown? Well, I consider my hometown Muncie, Indiana. Now, whether they want to accept me or not, I'm from that town because I have so many friends there. That's where I spent the formative years of my life, and how they may think is good or ill, I'm a product of Muncie. And I guess most of them feel that way as well. Last week I was in Muncie. I went to Ball State University and I received the Distinguished Alumnus Award for 1996. So I took that as a sign that they liked me in the hometown. One more question. Yes?
It's more of a general question. It seems to me that the efforts to equalize opportunities like affirmative action create a lot of antagonism between the racial groups, and sometimes I feel like the racial problem is hopeless, and only time is the one that it's going to change things. But do you think there is another way out or other solutions?
Well, I've never seen it as hopeless. I've certainly been disappointed and frustrated and upset from time to time. But I guess if I saw anything as hopeless, I wouldn't be standing here today. I would not have come through what I've come through. Yes, I think there are things that we need to work through, and obviously there's a lot of criticism and discussion about affirmative action. As I said tonight, I think affirmative action, in my view, does open doors of opportunity in a way that they have not been open in the past. I think maybe what we need to do is to kind of talk about race and the things that divide us. What I've been most pleased about is the book, I think, allows a discussion of race in a little different context than we have had in the past, and hopefully, maybe in some small way, it will contribute to discussion and bring optimism to that discussion. Thank you very much. As men and women carried with it our original and essential equality. So Worcester deserves great credit for promoting equality of opportunity from its earliest days. Equal opportunity as part of your history and part of your legacy, and you should be proud of it. Years ago, when I was a youngster growing up in the black housing projects in Indiana, I never dreamed that I would be on the college speaking circuit, much less talking about my experiences trying to survive in the racially divided world of my youth. Now it seems like I'm a historian, talking about people and places and events that seem so distant and so far away. Actually, I wish I was a historian, simply chronicling past events and times of bygone eras. But the more I reflect, the more I realize that America of today is very similar to the America of my youth in the 1950s and the 1960s. In the America of my youth, housing, jobs, and public attitudes were all delineated along rigid racial lines. And although there have been changes, the racial lines remain. The racial divide persists in housing, jobs, and public attitudes. Most of you were born in the last 2 decades, and you may not be personally familiar with the legacy of America's past, but you need to understand it, because soon you will be beyond this place. You will be the lawyers, the judges, the doctors, the teachers, the community leaders of the future in Ohio and around this country. And you know that each of us has to decide what we will do in life. Will we help make this world a better, more humane place, or will we do nothing? And I thought the urgency of the situation today was brought home to me recently as I followed talk about welfare reform and President Clinton's plan to end welfare as we know it. And while I understand the American reluctance to help those who can help themselves, I think we need to know who will bear the brunt of these changes. Unfortunately, it is no secret that those who will bear the brunt, those who will shoulder the burden of welfare reform, are children. Census figures released last August show that 48% of the chronically poor in this country are children. 39 million Americans lived in poverty in 1993, which was 6 million more than in 1990. The most shocking figure of all is that 15 of the 39 million Americans in poverty are children. 1 of 5 children born in America are born into poverty. 1 in 3 Latino children are born into poverty. And almost 1 of every 2 African American children born in this country are born into poverty. But this poverty transcends races. In real numbers, the majority of poor are white. A new Urban Institute study estimates that the welfare reform bill, when effective the first of this month, could push an additional 1.1 million American children into poverty. The public boasting and the swirl of articles accompanying welfare reform legislation sent my mind back to the work that I've been doing for the past 10 years, speaking and writing about my experiences as a boy coming of age in the 50s and the 60s. I lived at the crossroads of America. I lived at the crossroads geographically, culturally, economically, and racially. What I might do tonight is to share some of my past with you, some of my history, so that you might better understand that time and how it has shaped the present, and maybe it will help you decide what your role is for the future. Whether you will be an active or passive participant, whether you will be a person who seeks to bring society together, or one who focuses on your own personal needs and desires. I want to tell you my story of poverty, of racism, of family alcoholism, and of the daily struggle to survive. A struggle to survive in a world I did not create, in a world I could not change, and in a world that saw me as a threat. And I tell you this story, not because I am important, but because there are, even today, many other stories out there like mine. And we must never forget, as we sit here on this college campus, that we are fortunate, in some cases just plain lucky, to be here, to be able to casually pursue our educational goals. No doubt in the surrounding community of Worcester and north central Ohio, we could find many people who have not had, nor will they ever have, the opportunity that you have available to you, the opportunity to shape your own future and to not have it shaped by others. More than once I have thought that but for a tiny twist of fate, a misstep here, a wrong step there, I might have had a very different life, or no life of it all. I lost many of my boyhood friends from the projects playgrounds of my youth, to drugs, to alcohol, to violence, and to just plain poverty and indifference. And while I thank God for my fortune, I ache for those who hoped for a better life, but were unable to find it. Thank you for that kind introduction, Professor Hedinger. And thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here at Worcester. Although I haven't spent much time on campus, I learned a long time ago that this is one of America's premier liberal arts colleges. In fact, one of my friends, Judge Solomon Oliver, who is in the Federal District Court in Cleveland, has always been effusive in his praise and admiration for this school. So you have a graduate there you should really be proud of, and I know he is proud of you. Actually, at Ohio State, we've also had many Worcester graduates there as well. and they've added immeasurably to the quality of the student body. Actually, what has impressed me most about the Worcester students has not only been their intelligence, but their keen sense of service and concern about the world around them. In fact, I understand that approximately 1/3 of you are engaged in some type of volunteer service projects covering the gamut from recycling to hunger programs to working on race relations. Of course, I also understand that concern doesn't pervade everything you do. Being the parent of an Oberlin student, I know that the football team has not treated the Oberlin team very well in the last few years. I understand that many of you have been assigned my book to read, and I'm truly pleased about that. But I've been on college campuses long enough to know that probably maybe half of you have read the book and the rest are waiting on the cliff notes. Seriously, I am truly pleased to be part of the 1996 Worcester Forum and able to share some of my thoughts with you. I am also especially pleased to be at a school that from its very beginnings has been committed to equality. Your first president, Willis Lord, said the sameness of our origin. Until age 9, I lived a comfortable life as the son of a wealthy, white Virginia restaurant owner. I attended whites-only schools, whites-only skating rinks, and whites-only theaters. At age 9, my life was truly privileged. I bought whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted it. And I took that all for granted as part of my birthright. I saw no barriers to my life or to my future. And I felt that I could do or be anything that I wanted to be. Though I grew up in the rigidly segregated South, my family lived near black neighborhoods. And I saw the black schools, I saw the black movie theaters, and I saw the black swimming pools. And they were very different than what I had access to. But I never considered the injustice of the situation until my own world began to unravel at the age of 10. My father's drinking exploded into full-blown alcoholism, and my mother fled in the middle of the night from his beatings, taking a younger brother and a sister and leaving me and my brother Mike with my father. I learned to cope with living with an alcoholic. I saw the peaks and valleys of emotion, the contrasting loving and hostile attitudes, and I daily lived the constant turmoil that is part of an alcoholic's family. And maybe some of you sitting in the audience tonight have had that experience as well. Up to the time my mother left, we lived a life of total economic security. My father's success was enormous. He had a restaurant, a beer tavern, even a septic tank truck, which ironically he won in a crap game. All the trappings of success. In Virginia, he was the man with the Midas touch. Everything turned to gold. In